Hello, and welcome back to the Sudo Show, where business meets open source, a proud member of the Tux Digital Network. Joining me on today's episode are Brandon and Neil. Gentlemen, how are we doing?
I'm doing okay. Well. How about you, Brandon?
Doing good.
Well, we've got a hot topic for you guys today. We are going to discuss something that is at the forefront of every technology discussion out there today, which is AI or artificial intelligence, and alongside it, machine learning or ML. There's a lot of information to go over here, and there's a lot of opinions regarding whether AI and ML are good, bad, indifferent, and how do we integrate AI and ML in an open source way. There's a lot of conversation regarding data scraping and how that data scraping is being used, intellectual property rights, the technology that goes into building AI, whether it should be hosted on-prem or hosted in the cloud somewhere. And we will talk about a lot of that. Now, me personally, I don't know a lot about AI and ML. I'm actually rather terrified of it. So I'm hoping that both of you can sort of dissuade some of my fears and show me how AI and ML could be used in a constructive manner, what some of the best practices are, or the pitfalls to avoid if you are trying to set up and deploy your own AI instance in-house. Brandon, I understand this is a topic that you may have some information about, so I'm curious to see where you kind of land in the AI ML space.
AI, of course, it's the buzzword. It's the buzzword of the last year for sure. But AI has been around for a very long time in different forms. But what we'll probably talk about mostly today is large language models. So that's your Microsoft Copilot suite of tools, which includes like GitHub Copilot, Copilot on Bing, etc., and Google Bard, which is now Gemini. And probably the most well-known is OpenAI's ChatGPT. I keep flipping the T and the P for some reason. So
you got verbal dyslexia. It's okay.
And then, of course, there are others like very focused on enterprise AI, and that's stuff like IBM Watson X. And actually, in this, I do work for Red Hat. IBM is the parent company, but if you Google like anything around like AI ethics, and I'm going to get into that, there are a lot of great papers on it from universities, but also a lot of the papers on AI ethics have come out of IBM research. So if I'm referring to that, it's purely because they're the ones that have done a lot of the work and a lot of the writing around this. So that's why I'm referring. If I do refer to IBM research, an IBM research paper about this, that's why. What are these large language models used for? Right away, a lot of them are being used as chatbots online to do support, at least on the enterprise side. But the thing is, though, is people are worried, is it going to replace a job or replace jobs in certain industries? Maybe not. We'll see. I look at AI, any AI tool, whether if we're talking large, even these large language models, as akin to the calculator, or a spreadsheet. Like the calculator and spreadsheets didn't replace accountants. Could large language models eventually do a better job than accountants? Maybe. But actually, this was in a presentation at IBM in the 70s. You can't, a computer can never be allowed to make decisions because a computer can never be held accountable. And I firmly am in that camp that because a computer cannot be held accountable, that AI will never replace all the jobs, because people need to make decisions, not a computer. So that's the first part of this for me. Is everyone's always asked me what I think about it, and if an AI is going to eventually replace their jobs. And in my opinion, it just isn't going to happen. Not for some time. I mean, that will replace jobs or augment them, but it's not going to completely upend like a lot of people think. Upend the job economy like a lot of people think is going to happen. At least that's my perspective. But I have a very rosy view on this.
Well, I think I have a data point that probably backs up this particular perspective, and that's, Air Canada just got in trouble over a chatbot inventing a refund policy that doesn't exist, and they were forced to honor it because there is no reasonable way for a person to determine that it was or wasn't real. And at the end of the day, somebody has to be held accountable for what the bot says, and if it's gonna do things that no one actually wants, then you might as well not have it. And it looks like Air Canada killed their chatbot as a result of this.
Well, yeah, that's one of the big problems with LLMs is that in that case it was an AI hallucination. So it just made something up. That's one of my big worries about our AI, and the larger part of the idea is the larger the models get, the more accurate they get. But what I'm seeing so far, at least seeing the open source models that are out there, and we'll get into that in a minute, is the smaller models have a tendency to be more accurate because they're very domain focused, whereas the larger models seem to just make up things, or in some cases act like a grumpy teenager. That's my personal favorite.
So does that have to do with the way that the AI is trained out of the gate? Because one of the things that I could see happening with AI deployments is a skewed or biased view by the trainer of that AI, let's say by a company, to steer them favorably to a particular product or service that may be biased towards the trainer.
True. That's true, but in some cases, these AIs are being trained on the internet, and we all know everything on the internet is accurate and awesome, right?
Right. That's why, in order to do, the right thing, you gotta blub dub slub glub, and there you go. Now you have something real on the internet that has to be true.
Yeah, that's why in the case of like a large language model, if it was trained against a good set of data, I always felt that this like a losing access, like at least ready access to real encyclopedias. Yeah, I can still get access to Encyclopedia Britannica online, but it's I know there's a paywall for some of it and etc. But like losing that access and being able to verify has been kind of a verify information for me has been challenging. For me, what I'd love to see is an LLM that is trained against only reliable sources that could maybe it stays proprietary as a result. Like if it is like the Britannica LLM and it's trained against the knowledge of Encyclopedia Britannica and has noted the changes across each edition, yeah, that I would find that to be could be more accurate, because again, it's a very domain specific. That doesn't mean it's immune from hallucinations, but at least that's what I've seen so far. But that's what I've seen. That's what I have observed, because I've been playing with like Mistral, which is one of the open source LM models that's Apache 2 licensed, a good proper license. My only issue with it is the company behind it isn't releasing how it was trained. That's probably my only issue. But I do understand why, because it's an ever evolving market. They're trying to protect their trade secrets, but the model itself is open source.
What kind of hardware do you think you need to start with something like Minstrel to get it to where you want it to be? And how much time does it take to train something like this in your use case that you found?
Well, thankfully, I don't have to train the model because it's already trained. And you can do it with your CPU. You can run these models on a CPU. It just takes a long time for it to take your prompt and build a response. You can add additional things to the model, like you can bring your own data to the model, and it will refer against it. This is typically, at the moment, the way to do this is retrieval augmented generation, which is RAG. So you give it a database with your data, and then the model will consume it and build responses off of your data. That does require some GPU power, but if it's a small data set, you can get away with your typical gaming GPU. You don't need to get a giant data center card. So I've already done this. I've been running an AI model in my lab, and I've done it against had it train against my my tax documents now that it's tax season, and I'm asking it questions about my taxes over the last 7 years.
I never considered those use cases for using AI in regards to something like a tax return. Now, when you're dealing with the hardware for that and some GPU, are we saying that only NVIDIA is the viable option, or do you know if there's viable options either with Intel or with AMD graphics to accomplish the same thing?
So I've been doing this with AMD. So I've been running a model on my ThinkPad, and I've been running a model against a AMD 7900 XTX. But that's what I've been using hardware wise, because really all that matters is, can I run PyTorch? And all PyTorch cares about is either, can you do CUDA or can you do OpenCL?
I'll also point out that now we're starting to see what now we're calling neural processing units show up in CPU SoCs now. So, like, AMD launched the Ryzen 8000 series, which have, like the 7000 series before it, integrated GPUs. But importantly now, they've added quote unquote Ryzen AI, which is basically some silicon dedicated to handling the types of instructions that are used for machine learning workloads. And those are, like, I think topping out at like $350 or something like that, US dollars. And that's not too bad, right? Like, so you're getting a CPU and a GPU and some dedicated ML cores built into your thing. So some low end, mid range stuff, it's becoming more affordable. And I think with Intel, their new Meteor Lake architecture, which I don't know whether there's any hardware out yet, but it was launched last month. They have similar, like, neural processing cores built into the chips. And so it's starting to become a thing that'll show up in more places.
Yeah, the branded as Ultra.
Yeah,
Um,
the Core
yeah,
Ultra stuff.
the ThinkPad X1 Gen 12 has that chip.
Anything on the ARM side or RISC-V side that's tailored towards machine
ARM,
learning?
yes. Like if you look at the Apple Silicon, it has a neural engine already built in. If you look at a Dampier, I believe they have a neural engine built in. IBM Power is AI optimized as well. Actually, IBM is a chip that IBM Research put out. I don't know if it's going to become a product or not, but I'll have a link to that in the show notes. But it's a chip that's just built for AI, built for handling AI workloads.
I go back to the days of the 386 math coprocessor that
Basically back to that. I mean, it is basically the same stuff, right? You're like ultimately what these NPUs, for lack of a better phrase, are is they're very optimized floating point calculation units. They're FPUs. Like a big one is like they'll do FP16, 16-bit wide, floating point, 64-bit wide, floating point. These kind of really special wide math operations. So we're really back to the FPUs back in the days of yore, except for these are like just ultra wide FPUs rather than, you know, CPU bound FPUs. And kind of related to that, you see that um, on top of the Apple Silicon A&E, the Apple Neural Engine, you also have the made for Galaxy Qualcomm Snapdragons that are showing up in the Galaxy S24 series. They have they have a neural processing unit kind of thing going on there too. So it is starting to show up in there. I don't think these first and second generation RISC-V stuff we have anything, but it would seriously surprise me if we didn't see them show up in the next generation of RISC-V stuff.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything around RISC-V, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's already work on that or if it's already done. I just don't. I don't have any skin in the game at the moment for RISC-V.
now I hear about terms like ROCm, Zaluda, or ZLUDA, and I just don't understand what any of that means. Do either of you have any insight into what some of the terminology is or those funny little
Yeah,
acronyms are regarding AI and machine learning that we could help demystify for our listeners?
absolutely. So ROCm, as you put it, or ROCm, Radeon Open Compute Module, and that is a set of software for Radeon GPUs to be able to execute either OpenCL or OpenGL workloads. In there, they have a fork of several different projects. One being which LVM, which they're finally getting closer to upstream, and hopefully it will make my current headaches around Radeon graphics go away. My current headaches are basically any OpenCL workload is sort of broken, but also sort of not. I can get into that later. Mostly around using workloads like DaVinci Resolve and some AI workloads, but not all.
I heard if you upgrade to kernel 8 that you won't have those problems.
There is no kernel 8.
Exactly my point.
Okay.
Note for future listeners in the far future when kernel 8 exists, it doesn't solve this problem. Maybe it might, sort of, but completely by accident.
And on a future episode of the Sudo Show, we will try time travel to the release of kernel 8.
Most of my issues were actually just resolved in 6.7, but they were first in mainline, so 6.8. Anyway, I almost went to Rawhide for that, and that made my head explode. All right. Anyway, moving on. And then last is Zaluda, and that is a project that was announced fairly recently that originally Intel was funding, then AMD was funding, to allow you to run CUDA workloads unmodified. Keyword in there, unmodified on AMD graphics card, or, well, rather on any graphics card. But let's be real, that right now there are two players in this space. It's NVIDIA and AMD. And but being able to run a CUDA workload on an AMD graphics card, unmodified with similar performance, that was the goal, and apparently it does. I have not tested it yet. I have not had time to even take a look at it. That's what those are. That's what those projects are.
It seems like there's a lot of projects involving AI and ML that everybody's kind of either keeping to themselves or they're self-developing and they're releasing parts of it as open source and not other parts of it as open source. We know there's enterprise players that are creating closed source models such as Microsoft Copilot and others. Where does the behemoth of AI fit into the relationships that already exist in the open source software space?
Right now, it's I don't really see it as a relationship yet. And with there are lots of models being produced that are being licensed under open source licenses, or then there are others that are being released branded as open source, but they're not open source. Like I mentioned earlier, there are models that are the training data isn't being released, but the model itself is open source, like Apache 2, typically Apache 2 licensed. Overall, as an open source advocate, I'm okay with what's going on, especially with models that are being trained for essentially creating a fancy code completion modules. I don't look at GitHub Copilot as actually like a pair program, your AI pair programmer. I look at it as a fancy code completion because no matter what, I have to go check it. I have to check whatever comes out of that because I've tested it. Yes, it's produced some good code. I've gotten some good code out of GitHub Copilot in a couple of my projects I've been working on, but there's been times where it's a hallucinated an SDK that thinks exists, and I'm like, that. Well, this isn't a thing. I can't find documentation for this, so and I tell it that, and it goes, "Oh, sorry," and then it produces the right thing. It gives me a good starter. It's given me some good starting points, but yeah, I've had some interesting problems with it.
But I ran into an issue with one of the more popular GPT engines out there where I said, create for me this particular bash script. And it output a script that I assumed was okay. Now, I didn't execute that script because I don't trust anything that I haven't checked. But then I asked it to create that same question again, create a script that does X, Y, and Z. And I got a completely different script. I thought, well, okay, that was strange. Maybe let's try something a little bit more closely aligned. So I said, write me a PowerShell script that will complete X, Y, and Z on a Windows system. And it gave me output that looked within my set of parameters. But then I asked it to do it again 2 more times, and I got 2 completely different sets of outputs, which made me concerned about either the training data or the way that the model is constructed to give me the output that I need.
I think if it gives you a different result, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because in programming there is, there can be, not always, there can be more than one way to get that same result. So it could be referencing other code. if that happens to be in GitHub, that's public, or in GitLab, and it's just taking those other approaches. But that brings me back to, as an open source advocate, I'm okay with a lot of this because it's making programming a little bit more accessible. I still think people need to verify and know what they're doing. They shouldn't just go, write me a Python program that does XYZ into a prompt and expect it to work and be able to, and if they don't know Python or they don't even know how to program, they shouldn't be doing that. But as long as the attribution is there, because I have seen code, and I know people have shown this on Twitter, X, formerly known as Twitter, and other forums where people have shown that the code that is being put out is identical to the code that's in their GitHub repo, along with code comments, and there's no attribution. As long as that gets fixed, I don't care. As long as there's attribution, consume all the code, fork all the code you want. I don't know how Neil feels about this, but that's my point of view. I just if people want to reuse code, they're more than welcome to it. I mean, that's the whole point of open source, being able to reuse and modify code
while adhering to the terms of the licenses that code is under.
Yeah, that's all I care about.
Yeah.
As long as it adheres to the license, I don't care.
Well, when you look at the way that AI gathers data, public data, whether it's open source data or even closed source data, I recently had a conversation with a very dear friend of mine who's an artist, and she mentioned that she found one of her illustrations that had been reproduced by an AI, even though she did not give any permissions for any of the places where she had that data to scrape that and then recreate it. And I think we forget sometimes that anything you put out in the internet can and will be permanent.
Yeah.
And how that data could be misused or misled or redirected could really wreak havoc in the AI ML space. And I think one area we need to talk about are the ethics and the rights regarding data that may be used in the AI and ML space.
This is a very complex and very controversial topic. I know there's some lawsuits going on right now against OpenAI, and specifically around it being trained on essentially proprietary works, and then being able to say, write these things in the tone of this person, or rewrite the ending to a book, that type of stuff. This is going to be debated for decades to come, because there's going to be controversies of people saying, write articles in the tone of this author, an author that's long dead. That's an ethical thing that maybe we need to consider. Or if there's anything around works of art, whether that's traditional art, paintings, artworks, books. I personally feel that's the domain of humans. AI is not sentient, as much as it is not a person. It is a computer.
You mean that Bing is not Sydney? Because it does that a lot, where it'll call itself Sydney and then be very creepy about it.
Yeah, it's not. It's not actually. It doesn't think. It doesn't reason. If and when we create an artificial intelligence that can reason, that is by our current definition sentient, maybe we will need to revisit this. Then it's no longer just the domain of humans. But that's my point of view, is like these creative things and executive level decision making, because it doesn't do executive level decision making, is the domain of people, not a computer, no matter how smart we think it is.
I think it's important that we establish healthy boundaries as we learn more about AI, and frankly, it learns more about us. And exactly what you said, Brandon, which is what are human decisions and what are computer decisions, and where do we delineate that? And obviously, there's going to be a lot of gray area for, as you said, decades of as we establish this kind of relationship with artificial intelligence that frankly just launched on a whim one day out of the blue to the mass public, which, AI and ML had always been, kind of privately developed under the behind the curtains of companies. But once ChatGPT became publicly available, the floodgates had opened for conversation, debate, and topic. And I'm sure that the three of us are going to revisit this on another episode as time goes along. This should be part of maybe an ongoing discussion that all of us have, and as we learn and adapt ourselves within the Sudo Show community.
Yeah, one of the things I want to continue on really quick, just touch on, and then we'll wrap. But one of the other things that around ethics, with ethics, we were really focused on the I was kind of focused on the code assisted, and with attribution and things like that, and of course the copyrighted material. There are other parts of it of AI ethics, and one of those things is, I brought up hallucinations earlier, is understanding how your model did what it did. That is a part of AI ethics. And what concerns me is a lot of the AI models that are out there. When I believe I have to go find the articles and stuff, but from when this occurred, but when Microsoft enabled the AI chatbot for Bing, it's just started acting like a mean teenager for no reason. And if my memory is right, they didn't know why it was doing it. If you can't answer that question, you should not be doing AI. If you can't explain how your model did what it did, maybe it does get a little complex, but you need to be able to go back and go, oh, this is how it got there. Because understanding it, knowing how and why it did it, like if it's hallucinating or the AI just starts threatening you, like understanding why it did it, you can correct it. You can make it better. You can prevent hallucinations from happening, and you can prevent it from acting like a mean teenager.
It's one thing to have an AI that responds as a mean teenager. It's another thing to have an AI respond as a potential health or security threat to an entity when that data is not set correctly. And those are some of the things that I worry about personally are, if I discuss a health issue with a chatbot doctor, am I going to be given misinformation by that doctor that could have negative health implications? In the security field, if you involve AI in your security and it tells you about a threat that doesn't exist or forgets to tell you about a threat that does exist, what does your response model look like from there? And I think that there needs to be, as you said, accountability for those that are developing these AIs to disclose and remediate issues that come up from time to time. And I think we do need to dive more into the ethics of this. Now, Neil, speaking of the ethics, you had brought up a term called open washing, and I didn't really know what that was, and maybe you could help me clarify that a bit.
So there's two dimensions of open washing. So the conventional term of open washing is kind of what you see with OpenAI, where they call themselves open in the sense, but they don't have open source models, they don't have open source weights, they don't even have open source decision making about how they use these things or make them available. In the bad old days, i.e. like 10, 15 years ago, you would see companies produce things and call them open to deliberately confuse the market on whether something is open source or open standards or open for extension or open to use or whatever. That's the classical definition of open washing. The open washing I'm referring to in this case, specifically around AI/ML, is washing away the compliance requirements for code and such. Because one of the larger issues, and I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, was when you use a model that is trained on code and artwork and stuff like that, the generated output doesn't have copyright. It cannot be copyrighted. I believe the USPTO recently made a ruling that says that if it is in large part generated by AI or machine learning models, it is not copyrightable because there's no creative aspect to it. But here's the problem. That means that you can take something that is of creative output, use it as inputs for a model, and then with the right well-crafted prompt or query or command, generate something substantially similar that has been now deemed no longer creative and essentially wiped away the IP rights. This is much more blatant in the world of art, but it happens in software and in open source in particular. And that's a concern I have. And it's starting to look like the regulatory environments around the world are starting to wake up to this possibility and starting to kind of figure out what to do with it. But it's a real concern that I have. And it's one of the reasons why, like, I'm personally very wary about using AI/ML stuff right now beyond the absolute most trivial or just stupid fun time type stuff, because I really care a lot about the provenance of the stuff that I make, and having the assurance of that is important. I mean, to date, I think there's only one large language model that has license tracking and explicitly indicates that it is incapable of open washing, and I think that's the one that's used for the LLM that's behind Lightspeed for Ansible and such.
Yeah, the Graphite is.
I forgot what the model's name was.
IBM Graphite, and actually, I just saw a demo for this and for Lightspeed, and I asked this question: how does it do attribution? And it is clear, very clear, like where it came from, and there were. So it provided the correct attribution from where it pulled it from Ansible Galaxy. So if it pulled a playbook from, say, me, it would give me, Brandon Johnson, the attribution. That's the right way to do it.
Yeah, and like there's some time ago there was an article about this from OpenAI, where OpenAI made the claim that it is impossible to build a training model without copyrighted information. And that was why they wanted an exception to having to enforce copyright. And I'm just like, from my perspective, that's ludicrous. And
yeah, and I think some of these open source models, because I know they haven't shown the data, but there are open source models that are ranked that have disclosed their data that are ranked higher than GPT 3.5, and there are others that are close to 4 that are their data. None of the data, all the data is public domain.
Right. There's a large corpus of that kind of stuff that you can do whatever you want with. But I think that's kind of enough on this tangent, and I feel like the point has been made about the open washing thing. Like, so hopefully this gives you a better idea, Bill, of what I mean by this from this context.
And I think it's something, like I said earlier, that maybe we just need to keep discussing and talking about in future episodes. This is a topic that touches a little bit of everybody in every community in some way or another, whether you are consuming AI, whether you are producing AI, you're training AI, you're troubleshooting AI, or you're being asked by your employer to find a way to implement it into your organization. No matter where you are, it's going to become a huge part of our everyday lives, and it definitely warrants further discussion. So for now, we will wrap up and say goodbye to everybody out there. As always, thank you for listening or watching the Sudo Show, a proud member of the Tux Digital Network, and we will see you later.